Why, yes, I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Not live from Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Radio, Geek Talk Radio, a journey into the things we love. That's right, I said not live. Normally this show is broadcast live, so people can call in or tweet me or whatever. However, this week, due to interviewing my guest, Neal Adams, that's right, the Neal Adams, I had to pre-record the interview and then edit it for today's show. This is Shane Plays Geek Talk Radio. It's Geek Talk Radio, just like any other talk radio, religious talk radio, sports talk radio, political talk radio, but it's Geek Talk Radio, and I appreciate you listening in, whether you're listening on 96.5 FM The Answer out of Little Rock, or if you're listening on the online stream from 965theanswer.com, or if you're listening delayed by podcast or on Krypton Radio. I'm so glad to have you. I'll always love having you, and it's always a lot of fun here on Shane Plays Geek Talk Radio, a journey into the things we love. Don't forget that the show notes for each show are always up at shaneplays.com. So while you're listening, if you want to know more information about my guest and his topic, you can go to shaneplays.com, and the show notes are right there. That's ShanePlays.com. This show does go out as a podcast after the radio broadcast within a few days, and we're on Google Play and iTunes and iHeartRadio and all the other Stitcher, all the other cool and fine podcast directories that are out there. So to make sure to check it out, I also archived the show on the blog at shaneplays.com. Last week's show with Rodney Thompson, RPG designer, D&D 5th edition and others, but he's got a new RPG coming out via Kickstarter called Dusk City Outlaws. So you need to make sure to go listen to that. I know you'll really enjoy it. And last but not least, this show does broadcast a week delayed on Krypton Radio. KryptonRadio.com is SciFi for your Wi-Fi. Okay, that's the housekeeping notes out of the way. Let's get right into the show. Today's show is, I'm still blown away that I had the privilege and opportunity to talk to this man. It's Neal Adams. That's right, the Neal Adams, comic legend. His art is well known. He's been influential both in his art and in the business of comic books, fighting for creator rights. He just does spectacular work. He's one of the most well-known artists working in comics. He's definitely a giant. But did you know that Neal Adams also has a secret identity, just like so many of the characters that he's brought to life over the years? That's right, he's got a secret identity. For 30 years, he's been researching science involving the origins and nature of our planet, the geological theories around our planet. And he's got a theory called the growing Earth that also involves something called pair production. Now, it's fascinating, and we'll get more into it, but what I would say is listen in, because Neal will be the first person to tell you, hey, that people think this is a crazy theory. But when you listen to how he presents it, whether you agree with it or not, I think you'll find that he's approaching it from a scientific standpoint. So I want you to listen, and I will do an expanded podcast version, not the podcast version of the show, but I'll podcast out within a week or two the full interview, and we talk about other things, including his comics work and what he thinks of the current DC movies that are out there involving the DC characters. So with no further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Neal Adams. Okay, so again, very pleased to be talking with you.
Pleasure.
One of the reasons I was like, I'd like to have you on the show to talk about this stuff is because you're like, look, the Earth is growing. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? 1 minute we're talking about Batman, and now we're talking about this. I'm not sure I understand this. But you laid out some very good scientific reasoning. So the reason I wanted you to have you on the show to talk about this, because I want people to know whether they agree with your conclusions or not. You're not just pulling it out of your rear. I mean, you've got sound scientific approach to this to say this is why I believe this. So I wanted to give you a chance to get that. I know you've been doing it, and a lot of people have already been exposed to it, but I wanted to maybe expose some others.
There's a guy named Samuel Warren Carey who was extant in the 1960s who wrote a book called The Expanding Earth. Samuel Warren Carey said, that Pangaea theory that we have where all the continents got together on one side of the Earth and formed this big giant island called Pangaea? That's silly.
So he says that didn't, because that's what I basically got taught in school.
Yeah,
right?
that's what you got taught in school. And when that happens, it's sort of like if you're in ancient Greece and you were taught that a chariot drags the sun across the sky, then that's what you believe. So whatever it is that you're taught, you're going to believe that. That includes the geologists and the geology students, and they're really not going to argue against it because everybody pretty much accepts it. Okay, but if you think about it rationally, it's a little hard to imagine all these continents on the Earth through some process of cracking and rifting and spreading the undersea, managing to gather on one side of the Earth, 1/3 of the Earth covered with continental plate, and 2/3 of the Earth covered with ocean, 2.5 miles deep on average.
Right.
It seems a little weird. It's like a Star Trek convention of continents. How did they do this? Why did they? Well, what about why did they do this? What would have caused these continents to gather on one side of the Earth? The Pangaea theory is far, far sillier than that because the geologists say that 700 million years ago, quite a long time before Pangaea, the continents were actually on the other side of the Earth in the Pacific Ocean, and then they broke apart and all traveled around the Earth and gathered together in the Atlantic Ocean.
Well, if I remember right, and correct me if I'm wrong, most of the Pangaea theory is based on the fact that somebody looked at the continents and said, these could kind of fit together like puzzle pieces.
Yes,
Yes.
and I think there's actually a ton of people that did that. I know when I was 10 years old, I said to my father, it looks like Africa and South America fit together, Dad. And my father said, well, that's just a coincidence. It's amazing how many things are thought to be coincidences.
Right.
And so they discovered that there were rifts in the ocean. There were all kinds of clues to this. One of them was that this ship, that's called the Long Lines, that was laying transatlantic cable. Every month or so, the transatlantic cable would burn through in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So they couldn't figure out what it was until they discovered that there is, in fact, a rift down the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and the two sides of the Atlantic Ocean are pulling away from one another. So being a little short-sighted, as we all are, the geologists said, well, maybe all the continents were on one side of the Earth, all joined together, and maybe they, 180 million years ago, began to break apart and to spread. Well, first they broke apart in half, and one half went to the North Pole, and one half went to the South Pole, and the half that went to the South Pole deposited Antarctica on the South Pole, and then those continents broke apart, and so the northern one broke into Asia and North America, and the one at the south broke into Africa, South America, Australia, and Antarctica. So there's the process that they described that brought us to where we are now. And so geologists said, well, this is probably how it happened. Now, Sam Carey in Australia said, well, and a geologist, just the same as these guys, said, look, you just can't say these continents break apart and they move away from one another without saying where the oceanic crust underneath them or that's around them goes. I mean, you can't. It's a solid crust.
Right.
It's one big solid crust.
They're not huge islands. They're like connected to the.
They're not floating like marshmallows in your hot chocolate. It's one solid crust. There just happens to be continental plate on some of that solid crust, and that continental plate kind of sits outside of the water. But the oceanic plate coats the whole rest of the Earth. And so what happens to that oceanic plate? Where does it go? I mean, it's connected to the continent. The continents are like tree stumps in the land. The continents actually don't do anything. They just kind of sit in the oceanic crust, surrounded by oceanic crust, and the only spreading that takes place is in the oceanic crust. It doesn't happen in the continental crust except under unique circumstances like in Greenland, where the oceanic crust with the rifting cuts through Greenland. But essentially, the continents kind of sit like tree stumps in the land, and it's the land that cracks apart and spreads apart. So how does this land where does it go? If all the continents are together on one side of the Earth and they break apart, where does the oceanic crust that holds them, where does it go?
Right,
It,
because
it
I
doesn't make
mean,
any sense.
for them to all drift apart, and the theory, I'm just saying, because there's going to be some people listening to this to disagree with this theory, so I'm playing advocate here and just
Well,
asking,
no,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Everybody, in fact.
Well, so just playing advocate to ask, from your perspective, you're saying, okay, continents suddenly just drifted apart. Why were they suddenly free to just drift apart? Because they should be connected to the Earth's crust, basically.
Yeah.
They wouldn't just go bobbing off like a fisherman's bobber,
Well, because it
right?
because it became very easily known that they weren't they weren't corks in the water. They clearly, each one of them was surrounded by oceanic crust. Now, to describe the oceanic crust and the continental crust very simply, the continental crust is made of granitic rock or granite, okay, and it is approximately 40 miles thick, between 35 and 40 miles thick. The oceanic crust is about 2 miles thick, and it's made of basalt. Now, basalt is about 1/5 heavier than granitic rock. So you have to ask the question, why are they different? That's one of the questions. There are many questions. So that's one of the questions, and you write that down on your little pad over there. So if the continental crust, which is made of granitic rock, which is 2.7 times the weight of water, sits in the middle of these oceanic crusts, which is 3.3 times the weight of water, what is it that's breaking apart, and what is it that's moving away, and where is it going to? Well, if the crust, the oceanic crust, covers 2/3 of the Earth, it's going nowhere. It's nowhere for it to go. Doesn't make any sense. So Sam Carey in Australia said, look, the only way a responsible scientist can describe this as being in any way sensible is to say that somehow the Earth is expanding or getting bigger. Now, that was a big deal.
And this is where we get to the crux of, like, the main theory that you described to me at River City Comic Expo. And at first I was like, oh, this sounds really, I don't know, but you were,
Whack-a-ding-hoy, I think.
yeah,
The
but
technical expression is
yeah, it was
whack-a-ding-hoy.
yeah, it was whackadoodle. So, but I mean, you were obviously, as you were explaining it to me, you had some pretty sound scientific approach to it. It wasn't just like it's cool that the Earth is expanding, but you had some pretty solid reasoning behind it.
Well, there's a number of things that you have to consider. And one of the things you have to consider is whether or not you're going to study science by studying just one type of science. For example, Sam Carey studied geology. He was a geologist. Now, Sam Carey cannot give you the mechanism by which this can happen because he's a geologist. So his specialty limits him to telling you what the geology says. He says, this is the geology. I can't tell you why it's happening or how it's happening. So then you have to go to the physicist, and you have to say, is there a mechanism for doing this? Well, the physicist will say there's no known mechanism for doing this. Then you might say to the physicist, well, is there a mechanism for creating new matter? And he would say, well, you have to explain your terms there because there is a methodology of creating new matter. Mm-hmm. It's called pair production. Now, what happens in pair production is a high-energy photon strikes what seems to be nothing and joins it, splits it in half, and becomes a positron and an electron. Now, interestingly enough, the electron is more than 1/3 of all the particles in the universe. So there is a process that creates more than 1/3 of all the particles in the universe, and it's called pair production. Now, if I were Sherlock Holmes, I would say that is a clue, because as far as the general public is concerned, there's no such thing. You can't create matter.
Right.
So how is it that pair production can create more than 1/3 of the particles of the universe, the matter particles of the universe?
Hold on, I just want to make sure I understand, because it's one of the basic tenets of science, I guess, is that there is a set amount of matter, and you can only convert it into energy or whatever, but you can't create more matter. Is that basically?
Well, we say that. We say that, and on the surface of it, it seems to make sense.
Right.
We say matter can't be created. Matter can't be created or destroyed. It can be converted. Now, we say that now, and then we say things like, well, there is an exception. Oh, what's the exception? Well, the exception is the universe. What?
Yeah, the
universe was created 14 billion years ago. It was nothing, and then it became the universe. Bing.
Right.
Click.
That's a lot of matter.
That's a lot of matter. In fact, as far as I know, that's all the matter in the universe.
Right.
Okay? Created in a Big Bang in a process that apparently is impossible.
Right.
Because physics says you can neither create matter or destroy matter, you can convert it. So presumably, that matter was created from something. Science is wrong.
I think
everything.
I think we blanked out like on the last 5 seconds. So if you could, I don't know what happened. I don't know if it was my phone connection or what, but
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if you wanted to.
Well, tell me what you meant.
It was right after we were talking about boom. Suddenly, all the matter in the universe exists, and then
all the matter in the universe exists, and apparently it didn't exist before. So if it didn't exist before, then one of two things is true: the rule is wrong, that matter can be created, or two, that matter was created out of something that existed before, and therefore you have matter, because that's the second part of the rule. The rule is nothing can be created or destroyed, and the second part is it can be converted.
Right.
Like you can say energy can be converted into matter, or matter can be converted into energy.
Well, I guess to even take it down further, a lot of people say there are a set amount of atoms in the universe, right? And
right.
They can, so that's kind of right.
Which has to be kind of ridiculous, because before 14 billion years ago there were none.
Right, and so paired production argues against that.
Here you have another one. Okay, just so you know, nothing can expand, even though Sam Carey said the Earth expanded. In physics, nothing expands. There's no such thing as expansion. A rock doesn't expand. The planet doesn't expand. Things don't expand unless you add another force to them. If you add heat to certain things, they will get bigger. They will expand a little bit, not much. If you add a certain type of energy to certain things, they will explode, but they won't expand. They will simply scatter. Okay? So nothing can expand. And now we run into the problem again, except the universe. There's the big exception.
Right.
Excuse me, physics. Here's the rule. Nothing can expand except the universe. That's the one big exception.
But aren't they saying
it doesn't make any sense?
The atoms within the universe are expanding, not the actual size? And I'm just asking. I don't know.
Atoms aren't expanding. That would be really silly. An atom expanding? No, atoms don't expand.
Well, I was talking about
the same size,
space
no
between atoms, I guess, is kind of how
the space between atoms don't expand, as far as anybody knows, and there's no such thing. Now, somebody can make up a theory. They can say this time-space continuum expands. No. Tell me the scientific principle on which that is built, because in physics we know nothing expands. That is a rule. Okay, it's not even a law. It's a rule. We all know it. Okay.
Okay.
So how do you get an expanding universe? That's impossible. According to the rules. Now physicists, they all get together and they make this agreement. So we, like dummies out here, we listen to the guys in the lab coats and we say, well, I guess it's probably true if they say it.
All right, that's a good spot to pause for a moment. We'll take a short break so that our sponsors can help us pay the bills, and then we'll be back with more Neal Adams right here on Shane Plays Geek Talk Radio. Comic book lovers, visit thewildstars.com today. From the mind of author and comic book industry expert Michael Tierney, it's not just a comic book, it's a comic book novel. The Wild Stars is sci-fi and so much more. Learn the explanations behind UFOs and space gods. This isn't the Twilight Zone. This is the region of the Milky Way galaxy known as the Wild Stars. We guarantee you've never read anything like it. The complete comic book novel took 20 years to tell, with one reviewer noting, the story of the Wild Stars stretches ambitiously across space and time, from small-town murders to the destruction of planets. with every event given multiple layers of meaning. If you haven't read The Wild Stars, you're missing out. Visit thewildstars.com today. The die is cast. Plunge into worlds of fantastic adventure where dragons lie and the undead stalk the shades of your mind's imagines. Where creatures of legend plunder wealth through the horror of their passage. Monsters grim and foul hold the ecstasy of gold and the renown of glory. All this and more awaits you and your friends in the unlimited, fantastic world of the Castles and Crusades role-playing game from Trollord Games. Visit your friendly local game store or trollord.com to get your copy today. A rules-light, adaptable game that has stood the test of time. 12 years in constant publication with no new additions. Castles and Crusades is the original, easy-to-play attribute check system. Join us and unleash your imagination. Visit your friendly local game store or trollord.com to get your copy of Castles and Crusades today. Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays. Hey, welcome back to Shane Plays Geek Talk Radio, a journey into things we love. We now return to our discussion with comic book legend Neal Adams. So let me ask you this. Okay, because, I've researched this a little bit after talking with you. There's obviously a lot of people who are like, oh, we can't be talking about the growing earth. We can't be talking about this. There's two things I'd like to ask you. Why is it important? Because this is obviously a passion of yours. So
Passion? No, not a passion.
It's not a passion?
No, I have a passion about it. Yes, I have a passion about seeing that artwork is returned to the artist that belongs to them. I have a passion to see that artists get royalties. I have a passion to see that the work made for hire provision of the copyright law gets taken care of. I had a passion to take care of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. But once I won the battle, the passion was done. I mean, it was just a battle.
Yeah, a lot of people may not realize what you've done for creator rights. We could do a whole show on that.
Yeah,
so,
you could. You could. But the point is that to me, it's just a fight. And Sam Carey came up with the answer, but unfortunately he was a geologist. And being a geologist, he ran into a problem. And the problem was that other geologists discovered fairly quickly maybe not quickly, but after about 7 or 8 years, they discovered subduction in the Western Pacific. And subduction meant that oceanic plate slides under other oceanic plate. They took that subduction, which does seem to be happening in the Western Pacific, and they extrapolated it that in the last 180 million years, all of the oceanic plate is subducted so that none of it exists, not even 1 square foot, magically through this process of subduction. It's one thing to have a process that takes place in a limited area of the Earth. It's another thing to say that that process creates Pac-Mans that go around and gobble up all the oceanic crust of the Earth. It doesn't make any sense. It makes sense the process exists. It doesn't make sense that it gobbled up all the oceanic plate of the Earth in a little bay and a little inlet and a little place over here, a little place over there. It suddenly sought out and ate up all this oceanic plate simply because in the Western Pacific, some of the oceanic plate is going under other of the oceanic plate. To take one assumption and extrapolate that for the whole Earth and make that the answer to your question is nonsense. It's not only scientific nonsense, it's common sense nonsense. The problem with Sam Carey, just so you know, is that because of subduction, the scientific community, and I'm talking about the geological community and to a certain extent the physics community, said, therefore, Mr. Carey, you're wrong. Therefore, we don't have to prove you're wrong, because nobody ever proved Sam Carey was wrong. His geology is fantastic. He's a fantastic geologist. Nobody ever proved he was wrong. They just ignored him. They just put him aside. Now, let's just say it occurred to Sam Carey one morning. He woke up and said, well, the only way I can do this is to find a physicist to find the mechanism that creates matter inside the Earth. It didn't even occur to him that he's got to find a mechanism that creates matter for the whole universe. He just wanted to do it for the Earth. What physicist in his right mind is going to try to find a mechanism to prove a failed theory? None.
None, right? Because if it's already failed,
right.
yeah,
It's already
right.
Proved, yeah, it's failed. Right. It's failed. That's it. Sam Carey loses. The geological community wins. Doesn't matter that at some point in the future it might be a flip-flop. Right now, human beings, what they are, nobody's going to do it. So it's going to take somebody who has no tenure, gets paid no salary, has got nothing about his reputation that can be destroyed by this,
right,
and is willing to study physics and all the other sciences enough to find the mechanism to prove it to be true. Who would that be? I can't even imagine.
Well,
it took me 30 years.
Yeah. So, well, let me ask you this: like, what? I understand that having accurate science for science's sake, I think, is important because there are
no. It's paramount. It's
paramount.
There is nothing else that's as important.
Okay, so let's review. Having accurate science for science's sake, so that we're
not for science's sake, for mankind's sake.
For mankind's sake, right?
We're
okay.
Bumbling little cavemen, sticking our nose in all this stuff.
It's
paramount. Important for us to know this.
Okay, sure. So very, very, very super paramount. So, having said that, other than that, which is important, I'm not implying that's not important. Are there any practical, like we were talking about pollution or
I'm going to tell you a story.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm going to tell you a story. I had debates and discussions in the comic book industry about the return of original art, and I was making a fuss over the artwork being returned, that it belongs to the artists according to the copyright law and according to the sales tax law and blah, blah, blah. And I became the president of the Academy of Comic Book Arts, third term, and I raised this as a subject that we don't have to fight for it or anything. We just have to list it as part of our goals to see that artwork is returned to the artists and artists get royalties. People argued with me. I'm talking about artists. Neal, what's wrong with you? This stuff has no value. It has no value to us. Nobody wants it. It's just stuff. It's just, I said,
how wrong they were.
And I said, let us forget for a moment, okay, that you're wrong. We can forget that, okay? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the principle, the concept. It does not belong to the publishers. It belongs to the artist that create it. That's why you want it back. Not because you think you're going to make $50 on it, but because it belongs to you. Somebody's coming into your house and taking something that belongs to you.
They
cannot. Okay. So it doesn't matter what the practical application of it is.
Right.
Einstein never examined the practical application of what he was talking about until the bomb blew up.
Right.
So,
right.
You don't. Yeah. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is, we're wrong, and we have to be right. Okay, we have to be right, and we cannot wander around like it's sort of like climate change. If we're wrong about this climate change, there still is a reason to affect a better climate, and that is to save people's lives. It doesn't matter, okay, that the climate change issue is a false issue. What matters is we're screwing up the atmosphere. Look at the people in China; they're walking around with masks on their faces, just like they did in Los Angeles, in L.A. Walking around smog. What happened to smog? We took care of it.
Right.
We took care of it. Maybe not 100%, but we took care of it. Why? Because it was the right thing to do. Because we figured it out. And if we figured it out, we took care of it. And it wasn't a big deal. Some manufacturers made more money on the mufflers and the stuff that we did.
Right.
So there turned out to be a practical good thing that happened from it, maybe a dozen. But that's not the point. The point is people shouldn't be walking around in smog.
True.
So I'm saying that we should not be walking around in ignorance. You cannot have impractical, illogical things. You cannot have a population that walks around that thinks that continents moved around the Earth to go to a Star Trek convention on one side of the Earth, and the other 2/3 of the Earth had water 2.5 miles deep. It's the dumbest thing on Earth.
So it's
stupid.
Not only is it important to get science correct, but it's offensive on general principles that the generally held theory, if you really look at it, like, this doesn't seem to make sense.
It's more than that. It's more than that. This guy, Sam Carey, took the time to say to his fellow geologists, guys, this is so stupid, really. This doesn't make any sense at all. This happened. Your theory, the theory you present here, is a European, North American theory. Okay, it's limited to scientists who live in North America and who live in Europe. You haven't considered the Pacific. You haven't considered Australia, and you haven't considered Asia. You haven't considered any of that stuff. You came up with a theory that said that all the continents were together in the Atlantic Ocean. Well, the Pacific Ocean is exactly the same ages as the Atlantic Ocean, year for year. Exactly the same. Each ocean, Atlantic and Pacific, is only 180 million years old to the decade. They're the same.
Right.
We started this process by saying, how come we don't find any fish fossils that are over 70 million years old? That doesn't make sense. And we enlisted the U.S. Navy to help us explore the oceans to tell us why this is true. And we still don't know. And you're creating a theory that says, oh, here's the answer. It's the Pangaea theory. Well, listen to this, okay? 180 million years ago, the sea level was 800 feet above what it is today. 800 feet above what it is today.
That's like incredibly significant. Yeah.
That means that 2/3, and any scientist that's out there you can call and say this is a lie, but you just look it up and it's true. 2/3 of the continental plate was covered by shallow seas. 2/3, just like 2/3 of the world is covered by ocean now, 2/3 of the continental plate was covered by shallow seas. North America was split down the middle by a giant intercontinental ocean, in effect. It was a sea, but it was an ocean. The East Coast and the West Coast were in the water, okay? Only less than a third of North America was above the water. And it was split up the middle. It went from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, completely covered. If Pangaea existed and 2/3 of it was under shallow seas, then it looked like the Philippines. It wasn't one big giant island. I mean, why does it take a comic book artist to say these words out loud? It wasn't a giant island, guys. You're playing with people. How could it be a giant island if you tell us 2/3 of the continental plate was covered by shallow seas? That means it was the Philippines, just like the Philippines, series of islands.
Right.
It's bull. It's just bull. And come back to me and say, no, you know what, Neal, we discovered that, guess what? It wasn't 800 feet above sea level. We were wrong. It was about, 8 feet above sea level, and we made a mistake. And I'm sorry.
Well, 8 feet above sea level in and of itself is
already
pretty
a big
significant.
Deal, right?
Yeah, it's a big deal.
800 feet.
Yeah.
You can go out in Utah and kick the sand and find a megalodon's tooth, shark teeth. You can go to the Gobi Desert and find them. In Saudi Arabia, you can find them. In the mountains of Italy, you can find them. You can find all these fish fossils going up the sides of mountains. You can find fish fossils on more than 2/3 of the continental plate. In fact, it's the only place you will find fish fossils. You won't find fish fossils that are over 70 million years old in any deep ocean of the Earth. They're not there. They're only on the continental plates because there were no deep oceans. And if there were, they'd be loaded with fish fossils.
Right.
But they're not.
Well, there's a lot of weird things in the fossil record anyway that, like, I'm still stuck on the Precambrian explosion, but go ahead.
This is not weird.
Yeah.
This is not weird. They were digging in the deep ocean since the 1930s to find fish fossils. It took until the 1960s when they enlisted the aid of the U.S. Navy to go around the world and to find the ages of all the oceans of the earth. And they did that. And you can go on the internet and you can find that map that shows all the oceans of the earth and all of their ages. All of their ages. And both the Atlantic and the Pacific have an area that's 180 million years old, and it's a little tiny area. And as time goes by, more and more and more ocean is revealed. I have a chart on my site where you can look up how much of oceanic spread happened starting 180 million years ago, okay, to today. And the last 10 million years, new oceanic plate was made the size of Africa.
In the last how? Okay.
Just all right. 10 million years. The area of Africa, actually a little bit bigger. The area of Africa was made in the last 10 million years. That's oceanic. Now, you could say, well, it didn't really grow that. It was just surface that was made because it subducted and blah, blah, blah. No, please. Really. It was made. What do you say about that? All of these things, all of this stuff is based on the wrong guys winning the fight, okay? And instead of investigating scientifically and continuing the investigation, they said, we won the fight, and that's the end of it, and Sam Carey's wrong, and subduction ate all the oceanic plates. Well, guess what? Not only didn't eat the oceanic plates, they're still there. They're still there.
Well, I think
and there's a map, and the geological community made the map, and you can find it. Or go to a crustal age map. Anybody that's listening, go to crustal age map, pull up the map, and you can see the ages of the oceanic plate. It's right there for anybody to see.
Yeah, and that's one thing that is unfortunate about, and just science is a big term anyway, but let's just assume that science is one big homogeneous group of people doing something.
Sometimes I wish.
Yeah, sometimes yeah, but
let's study science like scientists again instead of like specialists.
Well, science is made up of human beings, and human beings are flawed, and there are afflictions that any group of people can hit science. So you'll have people push down theories for political reasons rather than scientific reasons, or just groupthink. They don't even realize they're doing it. So,
the problem is this. The problem that they're going to have is this. I'm not like other people.
Right.
My skin is so thick. I've had to fight my whole industry, and I did it with a smile.
Right.
And the reason I won every fight that I was involved in was because I did my research and I did my homework.
Right. So they have to
researched.
They have to attack the facts.
They have to attack the facts, and it's very hard to attack the facts. Very, very hard.
Well, you mentioned your website a while ago. I want to make sure people are aware of that. They can go to nealadams.com, and there's a science tab on your website that has a blog, and it has some videos. And then also, is this on YouTube? There's a nealadams.com YouTube channel. Is that your official channel there?
It's official, semi-official, whatever it is.
Well, is this your stuff?
There's like 12 to 20 videos up there.
Okay,
yeah, and people arguing with me and calling me an idiot.
Well, unfortunately that's the internet.
All my life.
That's unfortunately the internet. You could say the sun rises every day, and somebody's going to challenge you on that. So, but no, when you get into stuff like this, people are like, crackpot, this, that, the other. All right, that's a good spot to pause for a moment. We'll take a short break so that our sponsors can help us pay the bills, and then we'll be back with more Neal Adams. Comic book lovers, visit thewildstars.com today. From the mind of author and comic book industry expert Michael Tierney, it's not just a comic book, it's a comic book novel. The Wild Stars is sci-fi and so much more. Learn the explanations behind UFOs and space gods. This isn't the Twilight Zone. This is the region of the Milky Way galaxy known as the Wild Stars. We guarantee you've never read anything like it. The complete comic book novel took 20 years to tell, with one reviewer noting, the story of the Wild Stars stretches ambitiously across space and time, from small-town murders to the destruction of planets, with every event given multiple layers of meaning. If you haven't read The Wild Stars, you're missing out. Visit thewildstars.com today. The die is cast. Plunge into worlds of fantastic adventure where dragons lie and the undead stalk the shades of your mind's imagines. Where creatures of legend plunder wealth through the horror of their passage. Monsters grim and foul hold the ecstasy of gold and the renown of glory. All this and more awaits you and your friends in the unlimited, fantastic world of the Castles and Crusades role-playing game from Trollord Games. Visit your friendly local game store or trollord.com to get your copy today. A rules-light, adaptable game that has stood the test of time. 12 years in constant publication with no new additions, Castles and Crusades is the original easy-to-play attribute check system. Join us and unleash your imagination. Visit your friendly local game store or trollord.com to get your copy of Castles and Crusades today. Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays. Hey, welcome back to Shane Plays Geek Talk Radio, a journey into things we love. We now return to our discussion with comic book legend Neal Adams. Okay, so I wanted to ask you one other thing, and feel free to add anything else about this that you want. But does the growing Earth theory have any intersections with the hollow Earth theory? Or are they two completely different things?
Except that the hollow Earth theory is stupid and beyond common sense. No, not really.
Okay, I was just curious because just because an artist uses something doesn't mean they believe in it. But the hollow Earth was a huge part of your Batman Odyssey, so I didn't know if there was some.
Well, actually, it wasn't so much the hollow Earth. I took I extrapolated the lower level, and I did use the hollow Earth. I did very much.
Yeah.
And I extrapolated off of old science fiction radio shows that I used to listen to, and Long John Neville and all these old things where these kooks would talk about the hollow Earth, and they would talk about the Darrows and the Titans, and you would go to a building and you would to hit the elevator for the sub basement, and then you'd get there, and once you got there, you would hit the button 3 more times, and it would go deeper into the Earth, and then you would come out and you would have dinosaurs and all kinds of stuff. It's a great area for fiction and fantasy.
Right.
But since if you go down about 2 miles, your skin will melt off your body, probably not going to happen.
From heat or pressure or both?
Heat and pressure, mostly heat.
Yeah.
It's pretty hot down there. You're talking about a molten layer that's 2 miles thick.
And that's curious from a geological perspective. I've always wondered, why is the center of the Earth molten? Is it just because of the amount of pressure pushing against that?
The center of the Earth is not molten. The center of the Earth is solid. The core of the Earth is solid, and then the outer core, which is outside the core, is molten or a dense plasma. It is more likely a dense plasma, because once it gets that hot, it's very hard for atoms to hold together, because you were talking about between 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit and 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and steel vaporizes at 5,000 degrees. Vaporizes. So how are you going to get molten? You're going to get a plasma.
So it's beyond molten. Yeah.
And the reason you need either one of those under logical conditions is that the electromagnetic field of the Earth, and it's sort of like a magnet. If you hold a magnet, you know that the magnet goes, the magnetic lines of force go around the magnet and then through the magnet, right? Go down through and come out the other side, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, that's what happens with the Earth. The magnetic field of the Earth goes down into the core, and then it has a space outside of the core where it travels around the core, the outer core. So you need a liquid or a plasma to carry the magnetic field of the Earth, or else the Earth wouldn't have a successful magnetic field. Then, going outward from there, you have the mantle, which is like 7,000 miles thick and mostly solid rock, except for some mostly basically solid rock. And then up the top of that mantle, you have what's called the asthenosphere. And the asthenosphere, the top part of the asthenosphere, is molten. Really, only 4% of it is molten. So it's very thin, molten undercrust. Now, what causes that is these superheated gases that are. I mean, if you go with a theory, okay, it's not that hard to go with, but you go to the core and you say, okay, at the core, at the solid, and it would be a hydrogen core, not iron, solid hydrogen core, okay. Hydrogen is being fused into helium, okay, just like on the sun. So it's like a nascent sun at the core of the Earth, but it's solid hydrogen. There you get pair production. Pair production makes electrons and positrons. They are fed into the outer core, into the plasma outer core, and they're assembled into atoms, which is a complicated process. It would take me too long to explain, and I apologize for that.
Yeah, no problem.
But they would be made into assembled into atoms up and down the periodic table. In other words, you can't make new mass without it being all the same as the old mass. So it's all up and down the periodic table. You assemble these atoms according to the magnetic field that's there. Okay, and once they get assembled, then they go into the mantle and try to differentiate, and now into the mantle. But unfortunately, the solids can't easily do it, but they're made atom by atom. So atom by atom means that everything is a gas. In other words, if you take one atom of iron, it's a gas. One atom of copper, it's a gas. These are all gases. Not until you assemble them that they become a solid. So these, in effect, these minerals, this material, go up into the mantle, which is quite superheated. Okay, and then at a certain level, they slow down and stop, and they become part of the mantle. The gases continue on to the undercrust, and they come out through the spreading crust of the Earth, and so all the gases come out those cracks. So that's why you get more oxygen and hydrogen and nitrogen and all the rest of that. They come out from those cracks because it's an easier pathway for them than it is for the solids. The solids only go up to a certain distance, and then they stop because they've cooled out. If they assemble with each other and become molecules, their movements slow down, and so they stop rising up. So you get salt deposits under the Earth, what are called salt domes. You get oil, oil that's not really made of biotic material, abiotic oil.
Okay.
And you get certain rocks, certain kinds of silicates, but essentially those abiotic oils happen about the same level that salt happens. And if you remember the story that I did, you had this giant salt dome in the middle of it, and then Ra's al Ghul was mining oil there, and they were controlling the oil on the surface. So it's because that oil and salt are at about the same level molecularly. That's where in other words, if you're going to dig for oil and you run into salt, then you've got a good shot of finding oil.
Okay.
That's okay because it's the same kind of molecule. And so what happens is salt, of course, is made of two gases, and then they join and they become salt under the Earth. It's not from evaporated oceans. If somebody tells you that.
Yeah, I've always heard it's from evaporated oceans.
Which is ridiculous.
I don't think that you can believe something until you test your beliefs, right? So I'm not. It never hurts. I think that you have some very solid scientific approaches to this. Yeah,
believe me, as I was going through this process, I would go through these periods of doubt. You know,
yeah.
It was maybe I'm just totally wrong about this, and then it was just I got to study some more and crack some more books, and
yeah,
it kept on coming back at me. You know, I can imagine what it was for Sam Carey, who really didn't get to study much in the way of physics until later in life. But it's hard when the world is arrayed against you. Not that I care.
Right.
But the scientific community is arrayed against you. It's hard to believe. It's not so hard to fight. It's easier to fight. It's not so hard to believe because they're throwing things at you, and you kind of let me think about that. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm going to have more self-doubt than they are because
right.
I'm on the firing line.
Right. So exactly. Yeah, I mean, and that's good. You know, it's just like, well, let me review and see if I'm wrong here. Yeah. I did want to give you the opportunity And I totally respect the fact you're like, I talk comic books all the time. I want to talk geology. Is there anything that you want to mention about any comics work you're doing right now that you want to make sure people know about?
Sure, I'll give you a quick list.
Okay.
Last Wednesday was a takeoff of Superman versus Muhammad Ali, but it was Superman and Harley Quinn.
Oh, okay.
And everybody seems to love it.
Is that a variant cover? Is that a variant cover?
No. It's a full book.
Great. I want to get
It's like 38 pages. 38
I love
pages.
it. All right.
It's all over the internet.
Yeah.
Before that, while I was doing that, I also did DC is doing a series of Commandy books. I think it's 12 or 13.
I saw that. Yep.
And different artists are doing each book.
Yep.
And different writers are doing each book. So I did book number 2.
I can't wait to get my hands on that. Let me ask you this real quick. Back in the 80s, they did the DC Challenge. Is this like DC Challenge but with Commandy? What
was it?
Well, the DC Challenge they did in the 80s was there would be a different writer and artist on each issue, and then they would leave a cliffhanger that the following team would have to solve. Okay, I can't wait. Yeah, I can't wait to get my hands on this. Sure. Okay, yeah.
And before that, I did the Coming of the Supermen, which is a 6-issue miniseries, which has been put together in a graphic novel, which is actually pretty good. The last page of which is striking. Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'll pick it up.
Big time. And right now I'm starting Dead Man. That's going to include Ra's al Ghul and other folks.
Dead Man has always been one of my favorite DC characters. I don't know. I like everything about Dead Man.
Yeah, well, especially that he's dead.
Yeah, and he's dead.
No, he's dead. No, it's going to be pretty rowdy.
Cool. Well, you used Dead Man pretty extensively in Batman Odyssey as well.
Yes, I did. I did.
I love Dead Man.
Well, I've had some experience with the character. Although I didn't create the character, I really developed the character.
Right.
In about 10 issues of what they called Strange Adventures back then.
Yeah.
That all of which sold like crazy, but that's another story.
All right, and that's it for our discussion with Neal Adams about his geological research and the growing Earth theory and pair production. Listen, join us next week. We're going to be talking to Ed Greenwood again from the Ed Greenwood Group, and evidently he's going to be doing some more publishing involving the Forgotten Realms, if I'm understanding correctly, including maybe some RPG products. So look forward to talking to him next week. Finally, we can't end Shane Plays without the bad joke of the week. So I take no liability for this joke, should you choose to listen. But here we go. What do cats eat for breakfast? Mice Krispies. Thanks for listening in to Shane Plays, and we will see you next week.
Rock of Ages, left for me, let me hide myself in thee. Let the water and the blood from thy riven side which flow be a sin the double cure. Save me from
Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays.